Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew, with you here as always. This is Go Again, a fabulous video cast covering the trading card game Flesh and Blood. This video and others like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. Please show your support with a like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to get involved with the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There are many benefits to channel membership, including access to our Discord, exclusive deck tech and strategy videos, and the opportunity to help create channel content. I want to sincerely thank all our channel members, as I truly couldn't do this without your support. You guys rock. Go Commando.
Hello, welcome to Dice Commando. This is Go Again, a fabulous cast. I'm Josh, the unpaid intern.
And I'm Andrew. Thanks for everyone for joining us. So today's an interesting episode because I think it was 3 or 4, maybe even 5 ago at this point, I had done a cast on why I thought that Benji was maybe not quite ready for competitive Blitz. And we had, the long story short is Josh and I, well, we found out we were wrong. Josh has been playing around with Benji. We think Benji's actually pretty good. So that's what we're talking about today is Benji. The time is now. Hello everyone, thanks for joining us again. So before we get started, I just want to make sure, have a reminder out there that we at Dice Commando get our sealed product from Gongai Games. Check them out at gongai.com, and when you are doing your checkout, you can get 10% off your purchase, which is pretty sweet. On top of that, we get our singles from Fab Foundry, and if you check out if you not only check them out, but if you actually purchase from them using the affiliate link below, we actually see a kickback from that, so it helps out the channel a bit. So how are you doing today, Josh?
Doing pretty well. How are you, sir?
Doing well. So yeah, as we described during the intro, kind of the long history here is, you know, when we first looked at Benji, he looked pretty cut and dry, that you tried to play unblockable stuff. And then I had done a cast on why I thought that was kind of a trap, playing him only that because it meant that you were sliding stuff in, but then so was your opponent. And
Right.
kind of the longer story short is we had a tournament, what was it, Josh, like 2 Fridays ago now. Gongai had an online Blitz tournament, and one of the guys brought a Benji deck, and Josh and I were chatting after the tournament, and we were both like, wow, this is actually pretty, like, the way he had played it's to be clear, his deck wasn't like the God deck, but he had done some things in it that we were both like, huh.
Right.
At least that's what it was to me, right? I wasn't like, man, I wasn't like, I don't want this list, but like the way he's doing this is great. And then you basically ran with it, so kind of tell us how your strategy went.
And I don't remember it. I do know that he was using both of the new weapon,
The needles, yeah.
the picks, needles. Sorry, and the first thought process I had with kind of getting the inspiration of how to build this deck was to not have those because they're breakable. And if I'm going to have a weapon break, I want it to be because I've done 12 damage with it. So the first genesis of this build was actually using Talishar, the Lost Prince, because it swings for 4. It's a limited resource in that you can only use it 3 times. But with Benji already only having 17 hit points, either I'll probably be dead before I miss out on using it a 4th time, or I will have taken you out before I miss having a weapon for a 4th time. And so that's kind of where I started with, okay, if I'm going to use this with Talishar, what do I need to build the deck to make it functional? And basically, I ignored most of the new cards. I think part of what made it hard for us to appreciate Benji was I don't think right now all of the new chains that came out in Crucible of War actually fit with how I think Benji works.
So you're
best.
talking Soul Bead and the Crane.
Yeah, because
Crane,
Soul
right?
Bead Strike, it only has Go Again if it hits. And you can set that up situationally. But where I was going with where I think we can use Benji is everything that has go again and costs nothing or one. And the current build I have only has one card that it costs two, and everything else is either 0 or 1 with go again, or can have go again with some of the standard ninja equipment.
So to kind of hop in and bring people up to speed here, right? And Josh will tell us about his build in a second in terms of Talishar and where he landed. But what we really saw was when this gentleman sat down to play his deck, his first turn he would open with like 12 damage, right? And he'd just dump his hand, and he'd basically do everything that, and that's what I would imagine a lot of people watching this right now is they're saying, well, how is that different than what you proposed before? And it's not, or how is it different from what you said you wouldn't work before? And it's not. The difference is when we saw it, or at least to me, when I saw it in practice, it was he would basically do 10 or 12 damage opening, and then he'd just, for the next 3 rounds, hit you for 3 or 4 that you couldn't do anything about. And in Blitz, that's game. Right? So, right. And I when Josh and I were playing our kind of test games, I mean, the Talishar thing caught me off guard for sure. But that was the thing is, eventually Josh would punch through, and I'd only have 4 or 5 health left, and at that point, that's easy for Benji. Benji can handle that no problem, right?
Yeah, and that's what I like about this is my build is different than our friend's build. It uses a lot of the same processes where you're going to want to go wide, but instead of stabbing for one, and then paying to have 1 or 2 attack cards, I'm using the cheap Scar for Scar, Ravenous Rabble attack cards that automatically have go again and cost nothing to play. And instead of my go wide with that is at the end of it, I want to pitch a card and swing for 4 with Talishar.
As opposed to 1 with the Kodachi or 2 with the Needle, right?
Yeah. Right. So I think that's where I kind of do the same kind of go wide, but I do my expensive part is at the end of the chain after I've already hit you for 2 or 3 attacks, is to pitch a card or using a piece of equipment that's going to get me a sword attack to top off either my consistent damage or unblockable damage with 1 attack that's going to hopefully get some cards out of your hand or push something through if you've blocked my attacks that could be blocked.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know whether Talishar is the right play or not, ultimately, but I think the reason it worked, or the reason I'm impressed with it is, I think when we all looked at like Salt in the Wound, for example, right? I mean, I think when we all looked at it, we're like, hey, here's what we're going to do with Benji. We're going to do a bunch of little piddly stuff and then try to max something out, right? The perfect example being Salt in the Wound, right? That's a perfect deck, right. Or perfect card for him, in my opinion, because he can punch through 3 or 4 hits and then Salt in the Wound, and all of a sudden you're looking at a bunch. And I think that's right. Where your Talishar fits in, except it's not really conditional. So if they do block stuff, like say you throw down a Rabble and it swings for 3 and they block it, fine, right?
Right. And it also fits. It fits exactly with, like you're saying, that play with Salt in the Wound, because since Salt in the Wound is, you can only have 2 copies because it doesn't have a yellow, red, and blue. It's just yellow. So Salt in the Wound is kind of analogous to Talishar in this regard, because either I'm going to chain 2 or 3 attacks and then swing with Salt in the Wound, or I'm going to do the same thing with Talishar. So they kind of fit the same role in this build.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, it doesn't mean you can't play both, right? It's just that, like Josh is saying, that the Talishar is his consistent hit, and by the time Talishar breaks, if you've done it right, you only need to slide in 3 or 4 more indirect or unblockable damage, right? So I don't know. I definitely have to fall on my sword. I think Benji's more than playable. I think he's not a trap right now. I think Benji's really good. So I'll kind of sit back and let you talk. So you've taken him to tournaments the last 2 weeks, is that correct?
Yeah, last 2 weeks. We had a smaller turnout, so it was only both weeks only had 3 rounds, and there's a heavy presence of Guardian in my local meta right now, And against Guardian, I'm 50-50. I've gone 2-2. I beat a Wizard, and I'm forgetting the other class at the moment. But it's been pretty consistent. Every game that I've lost against Guardian has been extremely close. Even the ones that I've won have been really close. The other class I remember now is Shapeshifter, who obviously was playing a lot of the same Guardian stuff. So I kind of have the deck built to address Guardian. I don't know if most Benji builds would be carrying a reinforced line, but I do because I know I'm going to see Guardian. And what I found is, and I didn't even notice it until I sent you guys the initial list for feedback, is that you can actually, this is a pauper deck. The only Majestic I have in this build, because I don't own a Mask of Momentum, is the Majestic Breeze Rider Boots, which I agree are not great. But in this deck, it gets you a block, and you can give the one combo card I have in the deck, Rising Knee Thrust, go again in the event that you have two of them in your hand. And everything else is just common, non-rares, where it's cheap attacks that do have go again inherently. I have Head Jab, Leg Tap, Rising Knee Thrust. Those are my attack cards. Scar for Scar, Ravenous Rabble, Salt and Wound, and then I have 2, 4, 8 defense reactions.
And are you not playing CNC anymore? Command and Conquer?
No, actually, I had tested it with the Lightning Strikes and with Command and Conquer, but there's two reasons I took it out. One, once I realized I can run this as a pauper deck, I kind of like that idea that this deck runs on basic fuel instead of premium. But I think Enlightened Strike could have a place here. But Enlightened Strike, kind of like with Command and Conquer, it takes 2 cards out of your hand. Enlightened Strike, you don't have to pay to play it, but you have to take a card out of your hand to pay for the cost. Command and Conquer, you can afford it. The cost curve on this deck, I think, is 0.25. So it's not a matter of being able to afford Command and Conquer. And it really is an awesome card, but it's terminal. So unless I play it at the end of a chain, I feel like I'm getting less attacks because I'm costing a card and to pitch and then 1 to play. So 2 cards for 6 damage. The destroying of the arsenal is awesome in the event that that's something that's available for you to destroy. But I feel like I get more value out of a Ravenous Rabble hitting for 2 or 3, because if it hits for 2, it's less damage, but it's unblockable from hand. And then that's 1 more card I have to play another cheap go again that's either going to be something you can't block or that was free. So it's kind of leaning more towards going wide. I think I get an extra attack out of a turn. Any turn I'm not paying 2 to play Command and Conquer.
Okay. And then, so in these tournaments, did you find yourself... How often did you find yourself defending versus... I mean, I know that, generally, I think the Benji one's almost like a first turn play, right? You try to first turn play it and then kind of piddle in, or was that how it evolved, or how did it actually work in practice?
What I found is this deck is actually really flexible. So because I run a lot of defense reactions, there are times where I can't do much. So I can't go as wide as I want to, but I found I really need those defense reactions because a lot of my attacks are not blocking for 3, they only block for 2. So I need the defense reactions to actually do the heavy lifting, so to speak. So I found a lot of times I'm having to kind of improvise with what I have, and it just seems to work. A lot of times I'm defending with the defense reaction from hand and then defending with the defense reaction from arsenal, and that gives me 3 attack cards that turn, and I've been able to block for 6 to 8. And I found with this deck especially, I think it's probably common with Ninja because there's a lot of 2-cost class cards or two class cards that only block for 2, that you're having to kind of just mitigate damage as you go. And I think once you get comfortable with knowing what you can get away with blocking, and still taking damage and still be able to get 2 or 3 attacks a turn, I just think this deck is really versatile. And a lot of times your line of play might change with what cards are in your hand, but you're always being able to either get 1 or 2 attacks out and then turtle up, or just go wide and be able to get a pretty good consistent amount of damage. And then, of course, with Benji's inherent ability, once you get them close to like 6 hit points, you could just outright win without no interaction from your opponent being able to mitigate it. And that, I think, is the strength of this deck.
No, for sure. I mean, you had said something. I mean, you nailed it. You had said something when you were talking about knowing how much you can take, and that, that's an art in this game, is knowing how much you can take. But with Benji, like, once you're at 5, or I mean, you said 6. Like, once you're down there, you can't take anything, but you can't do anything about it. So you have to make that decision at like 15 how much you can take, and that ruins your game, right?
And that's one thing with starting off with 17 hit points. It is very scary, and I think I've benefited from learning how to play this deck, and especially against playing against Guardian, because the dominate is going to come, and you really need to be able to avoid those really debilitating crush effects. And sometimes you have to get lucky on the draw and use the Hope Merchant Hood to find you the reinforce the line if you don't have it in your hand. But I feel like playing this deck has taught me a lot about how to block effectively and still have a turn that I don't think I would have learned just playing a class that has a pretty straightforward plan of attack, pick a card, swing with the club, like Rhinar, and most of his cards block for 3, having to have attack reactions and cards that block for 2, and relying on instants to give you that oomph at the end of attack chain, or a defense chain. I think I learned a lot more about how to block effectively in this game playing this deck, because you start with less hit points and your cards on average block for less. So to survive, you have to still be able to put on pressure, but block effectively.
Yeah. Well, and you actually bring up an interesting point with a lot of the ninja cards blocking for 2. So typically in most heroes, there's a penalty for playing neutral cards, because neutral cards block for 2, whereas most hero specifics block for 3. But in this, you don't really care, right? You're just playing toolbox good stuff, right? Because it's the same for the most part, right?
Yeah, because like Light Tap and Head Jab, which we're running a full suite of both of those, they only block for 2. So I don't lose any value by including Scar for Scar or Ravenous Rabble, because they also only block for 2. So I think that's important to know, that, or to realize that for this to work, it works great, and you can get away with mitigating damage and blocking with 2s if you, once you learn the deck and learn the flow and what you can get, how much attacks you can get in a turn while still blocking with 2 cards. There's turns where you can still attack twice and pop to get the resources to swing up the sword after having blocked with 2. And I don't think there's many decks that have that line of play where you can get 2 or 3 attacks consistently, even after you've blocked pretty heavily.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So you have a list to share, or is it still in flux?
I've used the same deck twice. I didn't want to change it to test that out some more. I feel like it's pretty consistent. I do think long term there needs to be some tweaks. Like I have a flying kick in there, which is really awesome for a big hit card at the end of a chain. But I've never had a chance to actually play it, because I feel like I'm playing with one less card that I need to make that work consistently. So that might be a spot for, I think it would be easier to maybe even fit in an Enlightened Strike, because it wouldn't cost me resources, but it could cost me a card where you can hit for 7 at the end of a chain. So there's definitely a home, I think, for Enlightened Strike. And the other thing that I would change about this list, I think, that I'll send you that we can post up for people to critique is I might have too many defense reactions. I'm not sure. 8 seems like a lot. 8 plus reinforce the line means that's 10 cards dedicated just to defense. I think the reinforce the line has to stay, but
I would agree with that. Yeah,
I
that's a good
might
card. You're just playing the
the
red version, right?
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
But
card.
the one I find I don't know that I need is Flickflack because the only card in this deck that has combo is Rising Knee Thrust. Um, but then I'm wondering if there's an argument to be made that we don't even need leg tap in there. So I think there's some room for kind of fiddling with what ninja cards you include, but I think in most decks, the leg tap, rising knee thrust is actually kind of below curve for other classes combos for like Katsu or Ira. But for Benji and the way this deck is built, I think it's actually the right cost curve because you can leg tap into a head thrust, rising knee thrust for one resource and get a go again, another go again that gets buffed with the previous go again, and then often still be able to Ravenous Rabble or Scar for Scar. So I just think it's a pretty consistent deck. I do think it can be tweaked to be streamlined. I haven't figured out exactly what changes need to be made or what to test. Um, Partially because I like that it's a kind of a popper deck. Obviously, if I had the Mask of Momentum, I'd use it. I could squeeze in the Enlightened Strikes or the Command and Conquers because those are definitely cards that are well above curve for their cost. But I found I haven't really needed it. So I'm kind of at a crossroads about do I change what's kind of been working? But I do think that in order to make big changes, I need to see a diversity of classes to test it against because 4 out of my 6 classes have been Guardian. One was a shapeshifter who was basically a Guardian and a Barbarian. So I think it needs to be tested before we change much. But I would be interested to see what people think and if they have any ideas about how to, if this is the right direction for Benji. I don't know if I could be talked off of Talishar, but I see obviously the pressure point of Kadachi, but I kind of like the sword. It's probably not any more. It could be less efficient or less pressure on a game that goes 4 to 5 rounds, but I just kind of like the novelty of it, so I might stick with it even if it's slightly below curve compared to the Kadachis in the long run. But I don't think I've had many games that have gone past 4 or 5 turns anyways. So there's only been one time where if I had another opportunity to swing with the sword, I could have. So I feel like I like this sword in this build.
I think the sword is what I think that guaranteed big hit. I mean, big hit granted is 4 here, right? But I think the bigger
Right.
hit at the end guaranteed. I think that's pretty important for your deck because you don't really only need to stick it once or twice. And again,
Right.
right? We seems we say this every time. 4 is a very important number. Kodachis are swinging for 1, needles are swinging for 1, or sorry for 2, maybe plus 1. I would like to. I mean, maybe try it one time. I think you should try it with 1 needle and 1 Kodachi. I think that's the right pairing. If you're
Yeah.
going non-Talishar, I mean, because we saw what happened to our
Right.
buddy. He broke all his needles, and then he was sad, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But there's another interesting point is I think that if there's a one thing I might change in this deck that would be a mild changes. I'm currently only running the 2 red Razor Reflexes. I think that I should be running at least the 2 reds and 2 yellows because the Razor Reflex is kind of a sneaky interaction because if you hit with something that's 1 or 2 with Benji, they can't defend from hand.
mm-hmm.
So they say, okay, I can't defend. And then you raise a reflex, and they could then block from hand, but only with the defense reaction, which they often don't have.
So I like
So
lunging press. It's free. I know it's only plus 1, but if you're thinking about running a second Razor Reflex, maybe you go with that because it's 3 blue pitch, right? So
Oh, that's actually a fair point.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I know that the +1 doesn't sound sexy, but given that it's a 3 pitch, um, that's why I started running it in Ranger actually
Hmm.
because it
Now I
makes a
have to
big
take a look at
difference.
that
So, but I mean,
because I will say
that
the
is a
razor
really cool
reflex
interaction I
is
didn't think of. Right, they can't block from hand, and then it's a 5. That's
right.
yeah,
Yeah, they can't block from hand. They pass priority back to you, and then you raise a reflex. The risk that you run is that they have a defense
sure,
reaction in hand that they couldn't play previously, but you either forcing them to play it now and get it out of their hand instead of arsenaling it for later and giving themselves a 4 card turn. Um, but that razor reflex at the end of a chain, at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, and you go in there with a leg tap for 1, or sorry for 2, they can't block it, and then you raise a reflex it and turn what's a 2 to a 5. I don't know. I think that's a pretty awesome interaction with Benji because you can kind of fill out where you think their defense is, and if you think they have a razor defense reaction, then don't bother playing your razor reflex. Just get your 2 guaranteed damage. But if
yeah. No,
playing through the
I
chain,
think that's a
don't
great.
think they have it, and then
I think that's a um, great thing to bring up for Benji. So, all right, so you've shown us our list. You've given us the strategy. I think at this point, I don't know. We're excited for Benji over here. So thanks for basically sharing your experience of the last couple weeks with us. Yeah,
I
so
look forward to do some more testing
let
for
us
sure.
know, guys, when you're watching, what you think about not on. I mean, not I know the list is always the sexy part, but what do you think about the general strategy? Like I think the Talishar thing. I think his idea is kind of off the wall, but I think it really works here. So yeah, let us know what you're thinking. Make sure to let us know in the comments. So, Josh, do you have anything else before we get out of here?
No, sir.
All right, go Commando.
So committed.